Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you reside. Um, the purpose of this town hall is first off to try and provide some consistency to our messaging to our shareholders. Unsurprisingly, over the last few weeks, I've personally been inundated with questions from a number of shareholders, and it reached a point where I thought that it would be advantageous to us all to get together on a reasonable schedule and provide the information that you investors are seeking, and do it in a manner whereby it's a matter of record and it's a consistent message for everybody. Today, the leading subject matter is our recent meetings and the developments in Mexico with respect to Plan Mexico, and perhaps more immediately, Plan Sinaloa, which specifically has identified Santo Tomás as a project forming a part of an economic hub centered by the development at the port of Topolobampo. In that respect, I'm going to hand it over to Ian Graham, and he'll hopefully quickly walk you through what has transpired over the last number of weeks and how we see that affecting our plans going forward.
Thanks, Craig. Yep, good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to being able to do this on a fairly frequent basis and just keep everybody informed. We've had a fast-moving few months, commencing with initial engagement with the federal government in Mexico, and their very strong focus to move multiple projects forward in Mexico and to mobilize the economy there. Culminating last week in meetings at our facility, Ranchito in Choix, that involved municipal, state, and federal officials led by the state. And so I'm pleased to see Omar Juan on today's town hall, because Omar has been a key mover and facilitator of Santo Tomás since 2021 when we got going, and we're very, very grateful for his support and leadership. So last week, the meetings led by the state, participated federal through municipal, prepared us for a weekend that just passed, wherein Plan Sinaloa, a key component of Plan Mexico, was unveiled, and wherein Santo Tomás is the principal mining project in a group of 7 projects that are expected to see about $13 billion invested in northern Mexico in plants and infrastructure and the Santo Tomás mine, with the anticipation that up to 30,000 full-time equivalent jobs will be generated in the region over the next several years. So we're thrilled and gratified to be included in Plan Sinaloa, and Oroco now has the responsibility to mobilize our environmental baseline work, prepare for phase 2 work, and get going with the development of the project now, with the permitting and bureaucratic environment as a wind at our back, and we're now an endorsed and recognized project. We're thrilled with that outcome, grateful for it, and now in a position to move quickly into the future. Perhaps, Mike, we could bring up the deck and just show a couple of pictures. So we're just going to share a couple of a couple of slides and we'll just move through it very, very quickly. Perhaps we could back up slightly. Raziel, I'll pick on you again, if I may. And just if you could confirm when you can see the screen, the PowerPoint. We're not quite with it yet. Share. We should be with you in a moment.
So you understand this is our first town hall.
Oh, it's on.
We're rookies, and there will be some mishandling.
All able to see the deck cover. Excellent. Thanks, Mike. So maybe we can jump to so these are just some images from the key meetings. Top right, Mexico City. That's about 5 weeks ago. Directly following that, on the left meeting, here we are, the Governor of Sinaloa's office. Again, state and federal and represented. And then lower right, the meetings last Tuesday in Choix. And again, local representatives, members of our team, state and federal. And on the right, seated on the right, far right, is Omar Juan, who has been the state's lead contact for us throughout the development of phase 1 and now through this transition and the endorsement and induction into the Plan Sinaloa. So grateful to Omar. Maybe we can. And this is a scene from the Plan Sinaloa, a key part of Plan Mexico announcement. And the red arrow shows Oroco and Santo Tomás as one of the 7 key development projects in Plan Sinaloa, which is, as Craig indicated, focused on the Topolobampo hub and the infrastructure Topolobampo through Chihuahua and into Texas. So a very key part of Plan Mexico, which is developing around 14 designated hubs, with Topolobampo the hub for Plan Sinaloa. And just a little more detail on those, the projects that comprise Plan Sinaloa. We're jumping here, so a shift, if we might. This is the block model for the Santo Tomás project, and we're looking at North Zone. And these blocks are contained within a light blue pit shell. The darker blue outline is just the outline of the, thanks Mike, is the outline of the high water mark at the Huites Reservoir. And what you see is that, thanks, and then Mike, if you could just show the gray pit shell. The PEA pit shell is being outlined currently by Mike, and that pit shell avoided any incursion into the river area, the reservoir. What you see is a number of drill holes and blocks with grade that protrude into the reservoir area and into the resource pit shell, which is the light blue shell. Mike, if you could just sort of highlight. Excellent. And so we have been asked by various levels of officials in Mexico to contemplate what it might take to exploit additional resource out of the block model. We news released that a couple of weeks ago, and we will be looking to determine what of that resource could be taken and what it might require in terms of project planning to do that. So maybe we could. So on the right, a plan map of the existing pit, the red detail. We see waste stockpile at the lower left part, the lower west part of the map. We see tailings, lower right part of the map. And if we focus back up in the sort of gray dashed outline, we can see the potential expansion, possible limits of an expanded pit, maximally expanded pit. And if we flick over to the left side of the screen and the more detailed map, where we've zoomed in some on North Pit, and the same green line is shown in greater detail, we also show some potential earthworks. And Mike, if you could just sort of highlight the up a bit. Yeah, there we go. Some earthworks that would allow a water channel to be developed and some retaining structures just below the current indicator to the west and to the east of the dashed resource expansion line. So if you can come all the way, yeah, there you go.
I think it's important to interject here.
Yeah,
that this representation regarding the expansion of the North Pit, excuse me, is part of the consequence of what we see as a much stronger association with respect to the local regulatory authorities, etc., and that which we can essentially do to improve our lot, so to speak, with respect to the overall quality of the Santo Tomás project. In other words, the time is right given the headway that's been made in dealing with the local decision makers, such that we've determined as a part of our permitting process that we should advance the expansion of the overall mine plan as a part of that permitting process. I mean, quite obviously, while we have everybody's ear, that is the best time to be presenting this sort of amendment to our mine plan. It's certainly aggressive, but it's been at least verbally supported by those that are aware of our intentions, and so we feel the time is right to take this initiative. And part of what we've jumped to here in this overall presentation is reflective of the confidence levels that we now have as to how we need to move forward in terms of our permitting process, which of course is essential to the overall success of the project. So,
excellent. We've had a fair amount of inquiry around the permitting process for a development project from our current state of exploration, for which we are fully permitted. There's a lot of detail here, no intention to go through it by line, but the permitting environment is well defined in Mexico, and one can read Chapter 20 of the PEA for significant detail. So Mike, maybe there are two parts to it. There's a deep regulatory environment. We're currently operating under NOM 120 for exploration, environmental permitting, and impact assessment. However, there are a number of other NOMs listed in this table and in this one, all of which give very strong direction and requirements around the regulations for permitting. Mike, if we can just jump to the next. This is a list in the lower table of the principal development permits that are required for a mining operation and the agencies responsible for those permits. Noting that, for example, explosives are SEDENA, which is an arm of the military. So there is a comprehensive permitting environment. We have that well mapped, and we'll be moving through that process as is well defined and well mapped from our perspective. So clearly, number of steps, studies required. We have a team on site yesterday, today, scoping the baseline work that we're looking to kick off imminently. So the momentum has begun on environment, measurement surveys, preparations for monitoring, and to step us through the permitting environment.
So let's go to the audience.
Yeah, I think. So Craig was very keen that these town halls not be us holding forth, but really a town hall. We sought to say a few words just to break the ice, but we'd like to invite folks to ask questions. If you could raise your hand using the hand raise function, then Mike will unmute you and let us have your questions.
Dylan,
Hey guys, thanks for
start us off, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Well.
Okay. Thanks for putting this together. Can you do us a favor and explain? I think one of the recent articles that came out down in Sinaloa talked about a $20 million investment forthcoming from the company into the area. Can you guys walk through that a little bit more in more detail, and whether or not that's the plan or the publication just misunderstood something? That'd be great.
Okay, so that was obviously, it was a misquote. Somewhere somebody had taken up the overall sum. It's been mentioned a number of times as to the cost of the PFS, and it was misquoted essentially. We can't cite why and how, but unfortunately it happened. Yes. Does that answer your question, Dylan? The bottom line is,
that does.
There is no immediate plan to raise the money for the phase 2 drill program, which would be the core expenditure that would require those funds.
Okay. And then can you also help explain to people what's currently the role for Richard and Adam, and what are they doing for the company right now?
Richard is unfortunately he's gone recently. He's gone through the passing of his father. It was preceded by I think a period whereby he was not well. Richard's day-to-day involvement with the company is not required at this point in time. His emphasis has always been operations, and at this point in time, we have the people in place that can speak for the company quite adequately, and Richard is being afforded his time away, given his recent loss in his family. As for Adam, he's essentially been reassigned some time ago. I believe it was early February, and his role now is quite specifically seeking M&A opportunities with Richard, as well as strategic investment. And that is essentially his singular role. He contributes at times to certain of the online information that's provided by the company. But beyond that, his role is quite specifically, essentially, segregated to M&A plus strategic investment activity.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Akshay put his hand up.
Akshay, are you still?
The last question addressed the question that I asked. So thank you.
Very good.
I guess I do have another question since it is my turn and it came up. I was curious as to why the latest update was just an email and not sort of an official press release. I guess I'm very grateful for all the new investor facing initiatives that you guys are going through, but there's a part of me that's worried that you guys are signaling that institutional investors are just not interested.
Sorry, we're signaling which?
Email an official press release. And
No,
if you
but-
can maybe talk about institutional interest and what demand is looking like.
So the update that was given was actually drafted, I believe, on Monday night, or was it Sunday? The night before, sorry, the night before the announcement came out of Sinaloa. And so, yes, we could have then followed up with a news release or taken that 4 or 5 pages of an update and plugged it into a news release, which of course we've been criticized for many times previously in terms of having exceptionally lengthy news releases. So that was a factor. We had all of that information ready to go out. News release did not seem to be the appropriate form. And on top of that, we had concerns that there were elements of the Plan Sinaloa announcements and aspects of the plan itself that we did not have a significant familiarity with, such that a news release may invite inquiries which we literally could not answer. So it's not as if we were avoiding a news release on a permanent basis. It was simply that we decided to delay an associated news release until we had a full understanding of the implications of Plan Sinaloa.
Great, thank you.
Okay, question from the chat. How much money is needed to complete the PFS?
Best estimate?
Best estimate is $15 to $20 million. And the back effort work around that was done by Richard and Andrew Ware some months ago.
Question from the chat. What about the 100% deductibility of development costs per article?
That's being evaluated. The language that's been released so far is very ambiguous, and we're currently getting an answer from our professional advisors in that respect. But it's uncertain as to just what the implications are for Santo Tomás.
I guess as follow-up to the PFS question, we're being asked which currency. The work that Richard did and Andrew was mostly denominated in USD. Timeline for environmental related permitting processes. Key element of the environment is baseline survey work. That takes 12 months. The subsequent permits will be timed to follow key studies that reflect part of permitting, and some of the permits, very final development permits, require a feasibility study and a designated mine plan.
So I'm going to follow on quickly. I'm looking to the question asked by Quinn Hughes. the company has said many times that Oroco's ownership of Santo Tomás will soon be increased from 85.5% to 90%. That's dependent on the buyout of one of the minority interest holders, specifically the Rodriguez family. The patriarch, Ruben Rodriguez, died some time ago. Actually, it was soon after we had paid him for the first portion of their family interest that we acquired. And there was an extended probate period with respect to his estate. And we've only recently started to discuss the terms upon which we would complete that buyout. The $30 million number did not apply specifically to those formulas, other than specifically as it related to the 85.5% becoming 90%. The $30 million threshold was applicable to earlier milestones in that acquisition process. It was subsequently superseded by a $60 million threshold, which we have also met. But again, not related to the change from 85.5% ownership to 90%. That's a separate subject. Are you planning to sell Santo Tomás? Eventually we are, but we're not looking at it as an exclusive aspect of our plan. We believe that as this project moves along and as other opportunities for acquisition essentially are taken out of the marketplace, the demand for projects like Santo Tomás is going to continue to increase. And so, yes, the current plan is the current liquidity path, as we've defined it, is the sale of the project. However, we're not closing the door on other options. With the Plan Sinaloa announcement, is there any expectation of government funding for the project? Not that we're aware of. Yeah, and of course, we do want to own as much of the project as we can reasonably acquire. The update, and this, of course, is you again, Akshay. Your email update said, "We are just getting started. Can you give us some visibility of what you expect to announce in the near future?" I think it's really important to emphasize how critical this permitting process is to the success of the project. In large part, we know what the extent and the value of the deposit. The mine plan is relatively straightforward. It may be fine-tuned with additional drilling, but generally speaking, the values that have been established today will, in large part, hold, we expect, no matter what is forthcoming from a drill program. However, the core aspect to the success of this project, and this needs to be emphasized, is our ability to permit the project ultimately through to a production permit. And that is the overhanging issue, clearly, in terms of the lack of interest being displayed on the part of potential acquisitors. It's interesting that there is currently a major mining company that is very interested, as they've stated, in acquiring the project. They are already active in Mexico, and that is a key differentiation between the marketplace that we believe should exist and that which actually does exist. There's a clear overhang and uncertainty with respect to the permitting process in Mexico. That's what we're addressing at this point in time. We are quite confident that we've established the pathway now to approval of this project in that context. And for us, it's the critical ingredient.
Henry asks, does the phase 2 drilling depend on further environmental permitting? Henry, no, we are permitted for all of phase 2 drilling.
Have we turned down any financing offers? Yes, small ones. I think it's quite clear that one of the concerns that most shareholders have is the degree of dilution. We are just as concerned. Unfortunately, though, our market has been on one side not necessarily supportive or I'll use the term advantageous with respect to being able to finance with limited dilution. The bottom line is that fact plays further into the problem that exists market-wise. In other words, concerns about us needing to do a financing is not really allowing us to generate the kind of overall support for our market that would otherwise, I believe at least, see us trading at significantly higher levels. So we have these counteractive forces in the market. As a result, the offers that we have been getting, generally speaking, aren't what we are interested in accepting. Now, this is at the equity level current to today. If the question that I've just seen asked relates to strategic financings and the like, in the absence of Adam Smith, I can't properly answer that question, though that Adam and I communicate quite regularly on the subject, and I know that there is nothing immediate on the table.
Multi, you've asked around the route to production permits and timing. That will be dictated by progress through PFS feasibility studies. What we can control now is getting the baseline work, which does have time constraints, a year of data collection, going right away. So that's being kicked off presently. Here's one for you, Craig, the TSX graduation to the big board from Henry. So the question is,
we've been told once we commence the application process that it's a 4 to 6 week process. The big impediment at this point in time is cash on hand, sufficient to meet our operating requirements for the next 12 months, and we do not have that in hand. How long can we operate on this path that we're on currently? Our current cash position will allow us to operate into August. As I said, there are, at least I referenced, generally speaking, a little while ago, that there are offers. We know that we can continue to finance the company, at least in a limited sense. The key here, again, is to advance the permitting process such that confidence is generated within the acquisition, the M&A community, as to the viability of this project in a regulatory context. And we need to make that headway. We don't need a lot of money in order to do that. We certainly don't need any substantial portion of the $20 million that's being quoted as necessary for the PFS. But the bottom line is, while it's a relatively limited sum, and we're currently estimating $4 to $5 million necessary for this process to be considerably advanced over the next 12 months. That money, we believe, is obtainable. The question is on what terms.
Additional concessions to the north.
Well,
so there are concessions between the Bahuerachi concession block and the concessions held by by Oroco, and we have essentially begun to progress attaching to some of those concessions. On completion, that would be news released. Quinn, in terms of the PEA and the more sophisticated depreciation opportunities, yes, they would be looked at in the PFS. We had EY do our tax and depreciation review, and I believe they did that to an appropriate level for a PEA and the detail in that economic model. But yes, there are likely some additional depreciation benefits that could be taken in a more detailed study.
The follow-up question there is, the company has said many times over the years that potential acquirers could do their own PEA, PFS. Do you know if this is happening? Well, we don't know what others are doing, obviously, Quinn, but yes, that would be the case. They're going to take our numbers, but certainly they're going to do their own, and they'll be as substantially computed as ours. That's without question. Perhaps more so.
Yeah, and they'll put individual companies have their own perspectives on certain aspects of project development that's driven by the experience of the individuals in each company and that are in charge of any given project. So studies are always recast and always have a character of their own.
Regarding Bahuerachi, yes, as some of you would be aware, there were discussions about combining Bahuerachi with Santo Tomás some time ago, and they were quite extensive in terms of the discussions and meetings that we had with Jinjuan. The fact is that the senior management in Jinjuan Group, in other words, the entity in China that controls Jinjuan Mining, who own the project, were reluctant to take on essentially previous administrators' mistakes. And the mistake resided in the fact that they'd expended between acquisition costs and their subsequent development costs close to $300 million US. And yet they had not substantiated a viable asset. While the engineering suggested that there was a viable merger between the two projects, and it went so far as to scoping out conveyor systems that would allow the ore mined at Bahuerachi to be transported economically to the mine site at Santo Tomás. The fact is that the senior decision makers in Jinjuan did not want to take on the risk associated with being aligned with a previous failure. So as it stands today, we understand Jinjuan's determined that they'll put the project up for sale, which we understand they're working on with Macquarie. So we're just going to see how that plays out. But the possibility of combining the projects will certainly continue to exist. Timeline for the consulting firms?
Brasiles, essentially to be decided. Yeah. The reality is that the pivot in the permitting environment in Mexico has occurred this year, and we're really only seeing the Plan Sinaloa is not yet a week old, and so the crystallization of that change has only just occurred. But yeah, great question, and we'll stay in touch on that.
What are the key next steps for the next 3 months? Again, permitting, the application and listing on the TSX, and continuing to push for a strategic partner or strategic financing. until such time as we're able to gain the listing on the TSX, I don't personally see us broadening our investor outreach. It'll stay as it is. And we're certainly not going to be engaging in any significant steps within the context of the PFS, although there are certain elements that we will be addressing along the way. But in a general sense, the focus remains first and foremost the permitting process, and us being able to identify that the resistance that we know formerly existed in the approval process has been effectively eliminated. Can we clarify the difference between the US 4 to 5 million you just mentioned and the 15 to 20 for the PFS? Those are two different subject matters. The 4 to 5 million is that which would require us to carry the company through all of those activities that we've been discussing, but not including the PFS, other than some basic preliminary study work that would form part of that 4 to 5 million. Within that 4 to 5 million would also be subjects like an engineering assessment of the viability of the diversion, those sorts of secondary activities that haven't previously been mentioned. The river diversion, I think we need to throw up a slide that demonstrates the simplicity of this, relatively speaking. Yeah. Describe that, please, Ian, in terms of what that entails, the cut.
Yeah. So if we can zoom in on the map to the left, in the north and currently highlighted by Mike's cursor is a notional channel development that would channel the river through the headland that is at the Brasiles zone. And we would then need certain earthworks and a dike of sorts to keep the water out to the west and east of the pit development. So these are notional locations for those retaining earthworks, dikes, and then in between the development of a channel, a cut that would allow water flow to be diverted from its current channel.
The point of, if you go back there, Mike. The point of that exercise is really quite simple. Current estimates, and I think these are quite conservative, run between 40 and 50 million US to make that cut and to move the associated material into the berm positions that to the left and right, north or east and west of that cut. In doing that, we open up additional tonnage, which becomes essentially part of an expanded north pit, which we understand will increase the overall producible tonnage to over 1 billion tons of commercial grade and mineable ore. That's an approximate increase of 200 million tons to the current plan. That taking us over a billion tons of a mineable resource, all of which was established, by the way, in the original mineral resource estimate for the project. In other words, it's known that tonnage exists there currently in the riverbed, and it's attainable with a very reasonable strip ratio, as we understand it.
Right.
And essentially at the same grades of the North Pit in general. So the economic prospects there are substantial. And again, now is the critical time to make application to essentially divert the river, as noted here. I'm sure you can all do the math on $50 million worth of expenditures in order to achieve a relatively simple expansion, which would involve an additional 200 million tons or more of basically standard grade material.
Perfect.
I'll let you do the math.
No, there is no artisanal mining occurring at Santo Tomás currently.
Any banks showing interest in strategic financing? No, not yet. Grupo, I think, has always shown an interest in this project. They may be lying in wait in somewhat of a predatory position. We don't know. They've made statements to our local partners about their intentions, but at this stage, we're not essentially in a position of strength sufficient to enter into a negotiation with an opportunist.
The diversion work would certainly be done in the
Yes.
dry season,
Yes,
Multi.
such as now. Cost of the river diversion project, rough estimates 40 to 50 million is the ballpark. It's relatively simple. It's a continuation of the mining costs that have already been established for the project. It's the cost of moving approximately it's somewhere between 6 and 7. I think it's between 6 and 7 million cubic meters of overburden.
Tom's got it.
Yeah, go ahead. Unmute Tom.
Yeah, he's
there.
unmuted, yeah.
Right, Tom, you've been unmuted to ask a question.
Thank you, gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Gentlemen, I just want to say congratulations and warm greetings from Danbury, Connecticut, in the United States of America. Congratulations on everything and all the good news. As a retail investor, I am absolutely excited. In the past, for me to get access to this stock, I typically in the past have worked with Vanguard, and that's my primary brokerage firm with my mutual funds and my equities. And to access Oroco, I had to open up an E-Trade financial account to give me access to allow me to purchase the Oroco stock, which I was happy to do. Can we just talk about the uplisting to the Toronto Stock Exchange and really how important that is and how much additional access to liquidity that would provide? And I just think it's a great thing, and I know it's going to take some time. But if you could talk about the access to additional liquidity, that would be really helpful. Thank you for everything.
So Tom, listen, I really appreciate your comments, but I can tell you that I don't have all the answers. Neither do the rest of us have the answers as to all of the consequences with respect to American investors being able to access the stock. In other words, just to what degree it will improve those opportunities. You have a very technical marketplace in many respects. But our advice is that it will certainly substantially, can we define substantial, not specifically today. We're relying on the advice of those that know the marketplaces better than we do in terms of the additional exposure it'll give us. There's a credibility factor, of course, that's involved. And generally speaking, it's just a much better profile for the company and we believe more complementary to the opportunity.
That was very helpful. Thank you both, and good luck with these very busy months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks. Bruno, a list of permits, they will be sequentially dealt with. What we've been looking for is a regime in which we can have high confidence that we can step through the process. And we are now at that point as of the announcement of Plan Sinaloa this week. Mariusz, the diversion cost would come 20 years later.
No.
At this point,
Likely-
Mariusz, we don't know when that cost will be taken, but it will not be part of the
Initial CapEx.
The initial CapEx. It will come at some point.
6 or
during
7
mine
years into the
life.
project
Yeah.
is the best estimate. 6 or 7 years into the project after it's fully paid for. Schwab and Fidelity offer access to Oroco in the US. Anybody else that you're aware of?
No, I don't. Thanks, Jay, for that.
Yeah, we don't know
Yeah.
we don't know the American marketplace perhaps as well as we should. I personally can't tell you who else, what other firms are able to provide access to Oroco through the U.S. Listing. It's something that I think is going to become much more clear for us as we pursue the listing process with the TSX.
Randall, with respect to Randall, grade in the river zone is really very similar to the balance of North Zone, and we don't know what impact the additional resource will have on the NPV of the project. The impact on the project is more likely to be a factor in things such as mine life and total resource exploited, and that is what has generated the interest of key parties on the political side of the equation, who are most keen to see the project endure longer and high-paying jobs to remain in the region for longer. So I think the value is, social, mine life, and the longevity of cash flow. The impacts on the NPV may be modest because that resource is taken later.
But it would also have an influence on the sale price of the project.
Correct.
Which is important to note. In other words, while the NPV may not change much, the saleability of the project, the value will increase. Richard has added E-Trade to the list of entities that can access our stock in the US. Thank you, Thomas. Why would saleability increase? Longer mine life, greater tonnage. I think it was over talking about Brasiles. Personally, I never had the confidence in Brasiles that others did, and one of the reasons is it was clear from the beginning that the structure was dipping to the north, and therefore, even if the grades held, it was unlikely that the mining the mining efficiency would be the same. In other words, the cost of production would be higher, or mining costs. So I personally didn't hold out for the substantial result that I think one of the previous engineers that was associated with the property believed would in fact, he thought possible. The bottom line is, I think Ian still believes that there's tonnage that can be accessed there, but certainly not within the context of the statement just made here, Quinn, and that is that Brasiles is a monster. It does not appear to be as appealing a target as was thought initially. Regarding possible discussions with the Mexican government, I think that our expectations, which are simply, I can tell you that when we sat with the Undersecretary of the Economy at the federal level, and he asked me specifically, he said, "What do you want from us?" And my response was really quite simple. I said we needed certainty. We needed certainty as to the permitting process, and that's all we needed. Um, and that's as simple as it is. If we can gain certainty as to the permitting process, the perceptions and the value of this project will leap immediately. Now the question is, how do we get to that point? I think we will get there by establishing a pattern of receptiveness on the part of the regulators. In other words, had we started this process 2 or 3 years ago, we may well have run into a situation where our file was literally buried. That's certainly not the case today, but it's not fully tested. However, we have had a permit issued with respect to a change of land use that directly affects the project, and that has come at a pace that we never expected in terms of it was quite rapid. So the indications are that the regulatory side of the equation, the bureaucracy involved in approving these permits is now working in unison, essentially, with the political influences that are driving and creating this optimism for the project. Bottom line is, it'll take us some time to be able to substantiate that the process is working in a manner that we know will give us reasonable cause to announce the fact that we are clear in terms of our ability to reach the production status necessary for the project. That'll just simply come from an assessment of the interaction that has occurred over a reasonable period of time with the local administrators in terms of Semernet, et cetera, and the federal government. The federal government has told us that as our current status as an entity that's been placed on a particular registry, that they will become our concierge service in dealing with the regulatory environment. So we just need to substantiate that concierge service is essentially as advertised. So far, so good. But again, in order to be able to assert that process is in fact conducive to an ultimate result that we seek here, it's only prudent to give the process some time to assess that is in fact occurring. I think at some point, with respect to pursuing financings with outside entities, no matter who they are and where they are, I think realistically speaking, we have to take the uncertainty of the permitting process off the table. That's the bottom line. And I think at that point in time, and these are only personally my feelings, I think they're shared by Ian, but the bottom line is we have to reach a point where we are sufficiently attractive to acquisitors, financiers, et cetera, that they start to come to us. And that's the critical element here. How do personal relationships between Oroco officials come into play in moving forward? I think it's beyond business. I think there's been a lot of personal connections made. We've been scrutinized not only as a potential enterprise of value to the community, but we've been assessed as to our character, as to our intentions, as to our integrity, et cetera. And it's it's become quite personal in many respects, this development of these relationships. Regarding the takeout price, I think all of those metrics are possible. But again, we've got to reach a point where we can make those calculations with certainty that the exercise is of value. Otherwise, we're just, it's wishful thinking. And we've been too guilty of that at times in the past. The best way to value copper mining deals.
Yeah, we can reflect on all of those metrics, and we do track an M&A over the last more than a decade, and we try and value them in all of those metrics, and we see a real range in each of the metrics based on project status and the nature of the transaction.
Hi, Maria.
This is a Canadian company, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And how long have you been operating?
We've existed since 2006.
Oh, wow.
We had a prior small gold project in Sonora, which we developed to a stage that we reached a crossroads as to the ability to take the project further, and so we sold it. And we've used the proceeds of that sale to carry us through an extensive acquisition process at Santo Tomás, and have been actively developing that project since really 2019.
Okay. And so it's not on a stock exchange. So I'm embarrassed to say I don't actually have an investment in your company, but somehow I get your emails, okay? And I thought, oh, copper is a good thing to invest in, right? And I thought, well, I better tune in on this because I can get some information. Because, are you looking for big dollars here, like for people to invest, or do you take what's the minimum investment?
Maria, we're always looking for people to take a position in our equity, one way or the other. I mean, the simplest way is an everyday investment via your broker, or if you are able to invest directly. We're listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange Venture Exchange in Canada. We also have a trading symbol in the United States. But in terms of actual direct investment into the company, those moments and times come along intermittently, depending on the timing of the company's initiatives to raise money.
Okay.
So those are usually reasonably well publicized.
Oh, so right now you can't make an investment unless you go.
You can buy shares in the company.
Oh.
But in terms of investment directly into the company, as a part of its working capital, that would have to come via formal investment, which would involve the participation of the company providing that opportunity.
Okay. So go to venture, which is with the stock,
Yes.
the Toronto Stock Exchange.
And if you want to participate in an investment into the company, then just stay tuned.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead,
Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you for allowing a follow-up question. I feel a little greedy asking two questions, but it's just so exciting. Understanding that local support is so critical for these major mining projects. It seems like you've had local support for a while, and that it seems that Ian's on the ground, and Craig, you visit often. Are you seeing an even better pressure change regarding local support after all the great news that's happened in the past month or two?
Well, candidly, there's been a sea change in policy that has essentially evolved on a federal level over the last 6 to 8 months. AMLO, Mr. Obrador, the previous president of Mexico, had a serious degree of prejudice against the mining industry in general. If you were to ever study him, you'd see that this history goes back decades, and that has permeated the regulatory process quite specifically over the last certainly 2 to 3 years, in a manner that involved as well an attempt to provide certain legislation that further restricted mining potential in Mexico. That is now starting to ease quite specifically. The new president, even though she's quite closely associated with Mr. Obrador, I think looks at mining as on a more pragmatic basis in terms of what it can do for the community in general and what it can do, of course, for the federal treasury. And projects like Santo Tomás, of course, can move that needle substantially. I think once we're productive, it would be the second largest mine of its type in Mexico. So
We expect it to get roughly there. Yeah.
So it's an extremely noteworthy project in terms of a tax revenue perspective, and the new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, is providing essentially a much more open perspective on projects like Santo Tomás, but at the same time not formally amending the stated policies. In other words, we've been told quite specifically that our program, excuse me, our project will be dealt with at the regulatory level on a one-off type scenario. In other words, there is the investment community in general is not to see the Santo Tomás example as being consistent with a change in their overall policies. In other words, the policies of limitation that have existed with respect to mining over the last number of years. So ours is quite clearly, and has been stated as such, is a one-off scenario. And it's because of the importance of this particular project to a very specific region that has no other means, certainly identified to date, and this has been stated quite openly, of generating the kind of economic activity that is necessary to support that population. And
Thank
for
you, John.
that reason, and the fact that we have remained so consistently environmentally compliant to date, and the fact that we have been so consistently socially engaged with the community and continue to do so, they have essentially identified us as an entity that they will deal with in a regulatory sense outside the formality of their existing policies. Does that
Thank
answer your
Yeah.
question, Tom?
That's extremely helpful. And, from a macro standpoint, there's obviously a sea change.
But it's not a general change, and this has been noted. I mean, the undersecretary said this to me very clearly twice. He said this should not be interpreted as a general change in policy.
Understood.
Okay.
Regarding just so exciting to hear all that on the macro level. But in terms of support from the people of Troy and that surrounding region, mining has always been a part of their culture, and
Exactly.
they want this. I guess my question is, now that there's some studies regarding diverting the river, have you seen any change in the local support after the announcement of these studies diverting the river, or is everyone still excited to move forward and get jobs for the community?
I don't think that at the community level, there's been that level of scrutiny to date. We have not publicized openly the intentions to divert the river. It's been recommended to us by those that have influence, substantial influence, that we proceed with such an application. There is no certainty that it'll be approved. It's logical that it should, because of the ultimate circumstance that evolves from it in terms of the expansion of the mine, the continuation of the employment opportunities, etc. And it has no effect of any consequence whatsoever on the environment, like none. So we've not had to actually take this to the community level. None of that type of interaction has occurred to date. Generally speaking, everybody that we've spoken to has been supportive. There's been one or two individuals we've seen online being quite critical of the mine in general, just because they have their own personal viewpoint on enterprises such as ours. But the bottom line is, there's been nothing specific relating to the actual application to the environment that has come up that has raised our concerns. Is that a reasonable statement, Eamon?
I think that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you.
Do we still own Gold Group shares? I just want you to know, Quinn, you're the leader far and away in terms of questions. And one of the reasons I'm doing this, or we're doing this now, is you, Quinn. You ask so many questions of me on a regular basis. I thought I'd either have to write a book or start a town hall format. Do you still own Gold Group mining shares? Yes, we do. I can't give you the number, but yes, we do. Any plans for the Xochipala concession? No, not at this time.
No.
It's just not worth pursuing at this time.
Multi, the community work, yeah, it certainly has helped. And in reviewing some of the videos that are on our YouTube channel, with a few people who we've engaged with on the political side recently, their observation of our activities, and some of that video footage you actually captured, Multi, on a drone. So yes, it had an impact, and not something we ever expected. You know, we memorialized it for our own enjoyment to communicate with shareholders, but it's certainly, those videos have assisted, I believe.
So the question regarding Richard, unfortunately, we know the circumstances. I think they've been stated earlier. Yeah, I understand Richard was very close to his father, and it was a significant passing. And as I said, he's still the CEO of the company. We've got great respect for him and his talents, and he's essentially taking time away at a period where we're quite comfortable proceeding, essentially within the context of his approvals, but again, with the focus that is necessary at this time. Yes, at times it's more conventional to have the CEO speak for the company. However, I hope everybody understands that there's other factors in play here regarding Richard personally.
Trump and the administration.
We can thank Mr. Trump, I think, really, for prompting much of the encouraging activity that we've seen with respect to the political influences in Mexico. The tariff discussions, the way they were presented, how they were introduced, etc. I think provided a serious incentive to senior Mexican politicians to look inward in terms of their basically their business and commercial development. So in that sense, more by essentially implication than anything else, Mr. Trump has, I think, been of indirect assistance to us.
I think that's fair. Certainly hasn't.
We come from
been
two
denied.
different sides of the political fence, and we actually agree on this one.
Yeah. No, there's been real, I guess, acceleration, focus, etc., in Mexico on stimulating their economy, and hence Plan Mexico and the offshoots, including Plan Sinaloa.
Regarding this question of our corporate communication and marketing strategy, and the additional comment that stock sentiment is unfortunately still rather negative. Bottom line is this: throughout 2024, our corporate initiatives were somewhat, I think, impaired, I'll say, by a degree of wishful thinking and perhaps some lacking. We lacked the required scope in our financial planning. The bottom line is that became acutely obvious to us internally in late 2024. We took the steps in early 2025 to correct that. Part of what needed to be addressed was essentially our essential lack of marketing. I think we were quite aptly described as old school in our approach to marketing until recently. The fact is that we're still working ourselves up in that environment. We're building a marketing team piece by piece. We've not rushed into this. We take every step and measure its success as we go. But the simple fact is, we're facing a lot of a result of the inactivity of the last year or so in terms of investor frustration, just the general concern for, as I said, too much wishful thinking, not enough execution, and we think we're taking the steps to correct that. What is it going to take to get through this? We just got to continue to tell the story. We just got to continue to grind. We're going in the right direction. We know we are, and what is giving us a big boost, and I think it'll soon be recognized, is the change in the permitting environment in Mexico. But we just got to keep grinding.
That's right. The environment we're operating in Mexico now is fundamentally a sea change over the environment we were in the latter part of last year.
Is there any chance of company getting permitting clarity before August? Excuse me, not in an absolute sense. I think it's personally 9 to 12 months, but we'll see signs earlier. I mean, you're saying permitting clarity as an absolute. Yeah, I think it'll take longer than that. I think by August, September, we're going to see enough that we can start to essentially advertise, so to speak, that degree of cooperation. I'll use that term. But generally speaking, it'll take longer than 2 or 3 months to establish that pattern of receptiveness. To understand this correctly, raise more equity before August, without question. We have to. I look at it this way. I know that dilution is an issue for everybody. The bottom line is that as shareholders, we need to look at the value of the project today. And I know there's been a lot of thought and discussion over the years about this magnificent project with this extraordinary value, but that's the end game. That's the goal. It's not where we stand today. It's not where we stood 2 or 3 years ago. This is a gradual increase in a project value that today certainly wouldn't represent what we expect to be the value of the project at some reasonable time in the future. The bottom line is we need to continue to dilute to some degree by way of equity raises. Understand, as the largest shareholder in the company, I think I'm as concerned as anybody about the dilution factors. But the bottom line is the value of the project today is what has to be focused on. And the fact is that we're a long ways yet from the value that we ultimately seek to attain. And the bottom line is that the additional dilution necessary to achieve that end goal, that end objective, is substantially less than the overall reach that we're looking to achieve. I hope that's reasonably clear.
Boris, you've got a double question regarding capital raise, but also general M&A. Not to boot the can down the road, but perhaps on our next town hall, I can present a little bit on summarizing general copper M&A. I'll prepare something for our next gathering, but I will flip the capital raise question back to Craig.
Well, it does, we're going to continue to push. For example, Ian and I've got a meeting this afternoon with Haywood Securities. Haywood, for years, was the leading mine financier in Canada. Recently, they were risk off on Mexico. But today, funnily enough, Quinn, we have a meeting with the corporate finance department at Haywood, and we see that as an indication, albeit it's a singular one, but it's significant in terms of interest on the part of other institutional entities.
Quinn, you have a question regarding Cantor, and I know Matthew is still on the call. Matt, are you able to respond to Quinn directly? If you're still there. So I did note that Matthew O'Keefe of Cantor Fitzgerald is on the call. He may not be monitoring us right this second, but yes, they still cover us.
So, Olivier, the list of our contributions locally is quite substantial. The soccer team would be one of the less significant ones, I'm sure. I'll let Ian describe, because he lived there for 2 years, many of the other things we do. But we've also done a couple of very significant things of late, which have not been disclosed publicly. They're really, truly significant in terms of the potential value to the community of choice. And they would be a part of, they're structured in a way that they would be part of the successful creation of Santo Tomás as an operating entity. But believe me, our contributions, past, present, and future, are becoming increasingly substantial, and we're constantly looking for ways that we can contribute to the local community. Last week, we, for example, committed to basically upgrading the water system for the entire community. So, things are becoming, as I said, sponsoring the soccer team is certainly one of them, but our contributions become more substantial all the time. Is that a reasonable statement?
That's absolutely true. And we're diversifying. Obviously, children's sport is one we really like to do. But you know, we're helping out when kids do well in the Math Olympiad, making sure they can get to Culiacan.
Well, we built out.
And then if they make it to Mexico City, we support that travel as well. So one of the local kids in Choix did make it, was a runner-up in the National Math Olympiad, and we made sure he and his mum got to Mexico City to participate in that event. So, you know, it's opportunistic sometimes, and just trying to make sure, particularly kids, and then essential services like drinking water and getting water into the city during the dry period are priorities.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you one other example. I know Ian loves to focus on the sort of the on-site the on-site activities that he feels as somebody that was a member of that community. Bottom line is, a few years ago, we identified a shortcoming in terms of the educational levels and the access to the internet, etc. So we essentially built out 4 schools with computer labs. And from my perspective, I know these math competitions are important,
Yeah.
but from my perspective, it was a matter of something that we could do for the entire the elementary school level, is give all of these kids through all of those schools full access to the internet, etc., and not one computer at a time. We're talking about full computer labs, 16, 20 computers at a time at individual desks, etc. And that was done with the assistance of Ubaldo Treviso, who's just a great asset to the company, and we don't mention him enough. I mean, he is a key ingredient to all this. I can tell you, I said to Mario Zamora about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were talking about Ubaldo and the contributions he's made, and I don't know. I said to Mario that I didn't know that we could. I wasn't confident that we could have made this project work without Ubaldo. And Mario looked at me and he said, without hesitation, it would have been impossible. In other words, the link that Ubaldo provides to the community, for reason of his interest, and he has a substantial interest in the project himself, but that link is essential to much of what is going on in terms of our assimilation as an entity within that, into that community, and that which is progressing at the political level.
Entirely agreed. Certainly, for Linda and I to have been residents in Choix and integrate as much as we were able to into the community was thanks to Ubaldo, his son, and Doris Castro, and others in the community who are part of our venture. And you know, we've had many visitors to the project over time, and always I believe our hospitality and their reception has been good, thanks to the Ubaldos, Donyema and Vicky and Doris and all of those who are our project family. So we're not seeing additional
How are we doing?
additional comments. I guess we've made one commitment to the next town hall, that I will present some M&A data. I think that was in response to
Yes.
perhaps Quinn or Paris. Paris. Thanks for that. And I will do a bit of work on that between now and our next gathering. But thank you everybody for taking the time. From my perspective, I think this will be a great way for us to remain in communication with all of you.
And you know, I'll just conclude by going back to what I think is quite obviously the theme of that I'm trying to focus everyone on, and that is the importance of the permitting process, and why we believe that we can work our way through this now successfully. Whereas we couldn't have said that 2 years ago. Quite literally, we could not have said that honestly 2 years ago. The bottom line here is from a market perspective, I truly believe that we will see a significant increase in support for our market once it becomes reasonably clear that that permitting process is working. And it's as simple as that. And, I know a lot of people want to see the drills turning and all sorts of other things that, believe me, will not add the value that the certainty of the permitting process will bring. And that will come in reasonable degrees. And I truly believe that it will affect our market quite significantly. So essentially, that's my closing message. That's where we need to focus. That's where the earliest results will come from.
I agree. Thanks again, everybody, and look forward to doing this again in the not too distant future.
And please excuse our rookie mistakes.